The stars burned like dying embers across the void, and empires once eternal crumbled into dust. Among the ruins of forgotten dominions, one figure still stood unbroken, the alien queen, ancient and relentless. Her crown had been forged in conquest, her reign secured by fear, yet now she looked upon a galaxy slipping from her grasp. Her people whispered of decline, their fleets thinned, their worlds hollowed by centuries of overreach. Where once she commanded endless armies, she now presided over fragments of a kingdom clinging to fading glory. She could not admit weakness, for weakness was death. It was then her gaze turned to the rising fire of humanity. To her, humans were short-lived, crude, reckless in their hunger for new worlds. Yet their numbers swelled like a tide, their colonies multiplying in places her empire could no longer hold. They were fragile, yes, but stubborn, a force that grew stronger each time it should have broken. She saw in them a reflection of everything she both despised and secretly feared, the will to endure. For the queen, this was unacceptable. Pride and survival twisted together into a single command. She declared war, her voice echoing across the void, carried on the wings of steel armadas. It was not strategy but fury that drove her, a demand to prove her empire was not dying but still capable of bending others to her rule. If her people saw her hesitate, the illusion of her power would collapse, and with it, the very order she had maintained for centuries. Humanity became her chosen enemy, not because they had struck her first, but because their existence mocked her empire's decline. From the bridge of her flagship, she watched the opening strikes. Human defenses buckled under the first wave, colonies scorched into silence. Cities burned, and she drank in the vision with satisfaction, for it soothed the ache of her fading dominion. Yet even as flames consumed new worlds, she could not ignore the cost. Her fleets returned fractured, soldiers broken, and whispers of unrest grew among her own kind. War, once a symbol of her strength, began to expose the weakness she had hoped to hide. Still, she pressed on. To falter now would unravel everything she had built. Her commanders raised concerns, her priests muttered warnings of prophecy and doom, but she silenced them all. In her mind, humanity was not simply an enemy, it was a mirror she had to shatter. For as long as they lived and thrived, they proved that survival was not hers alone to claim. So the war raged. Entire sectors drowned in conflict, and still the humans resisted. They fought with desperation, adapting in ways her ancient strategies could not predict. Every loss should have ended them, yet they returned with renewed defiance. It gnawed at her, each report of their resilience striking deeper than the wounds to her fleets. And though she would never speak it aloud, a single question crept into her heart. Was she truly proving her empire's strength, or only revealing its decay? The crown weighed heavier with each passing cycle. Her people began to murmur not of glory, but of exhaustion. In private, she stared into the void and wondered if her empire had already died long before this war began, its corpse merely animated by her refusal to let go. Humanity was not her destroyer, but the reminder of truths she dared not face. Yet she pressed the fleets onward, for the crown could not be abandoned, not while her name still commanded fear. In the silence between battles, the queen felt the shadow of inevitability creeping closer. Her empire was bleeding, her throne cracking, and her enemies multiplying. And still, she clung to war as though it could rewrite fate. For to her, surrender was not an option, and peace was nothing but the prelude to oblivion. Amid the shattered ruins of a battlefield where steel and fire had torn the ground into scars, a lone human soldier struggled to rise. His armor was broken, his body weary, but his will refused to yield. Around him lay silence, the kind that follows slaughter, punctuated only by distant echoes of engines retreating into the sky. He had no comrades left, no orders to follow, no hope of rescue. Yet even in isolation, he moved, driven not by duty, but by the instinct to endure. Through smoke and ash, he found movement, a faint sound that was not machine or beast, but something smaller, fragile. Two figures emerged from the wreckage. Children, though not human. Their skin bore the faint glow of alien lineage, their eyes wide with fear, their forms trembling as they clung to one another. He knew instantly what they were, offspring of the very enemy that had laid waste to his world. Logic demanded he turn away. Orders from any commander would have branded them enemies, symbols of the empire that sought humanity's end. But in that moment, logic faltered. He saw not heirs of war, but innocents caught in its storm. Their faces were streaked with ash, their small hands searching for safety in a wasteland that offered none. Against all reason, he moved closer, lowering his weapon, extending hands scarred by battles they could not comprehend. At first they recoiled, whispering in a language he could not understand. Yet when hunger and exhaustion overcame fear, they accepted the food he offered, the water he shared. Each step after became a choice. He carried them through rubble, shielding them when the air shook with distant fire. He bound their wounds with what little remained of his supplies, his own blood staining the cloth. In the shadows of burned cities, he held his silence as their trust grew. They leaned against him when sleep claimed them, their breath steadying where once there had only been sobs. And though he did not know their names, they became more than strangers. They became responsibility, a bond unasked for yet unbreakable. He thought of the faces he had lost, comrades fallen, worlds burning. Perhaps in saving them, he sought to salvage something that war had stripped from him. Or perhaps it was simpler, that humanity's strength was never in conquest, but in choosing mercy when all else demanded cruelty. These children, heirs of his enemy, slept without fear against his chest because he had decided they would not suffer the fate of war's countless dead. Exhaustion weighed on him, but he pressed forward. Each step carried more than his own survival, it carried theirs. He had become their shield, their anchor in the storm, and he bore it without question. He knew discovery would mean death, that both his kind and theirs would brand him traitor or threat. Yet as night fell and the children curled against him, trusting wholly in his strength, he realized it did not matter. He had chosen a path that no empire, no queen, no commander could dictate. Humanity, he thought, was not defined by fleets or weapons. It was defined by this, the refusal to abandon the vulnerable, the courage to protect life even when it belonged to an enemy. And in that truth, he found a measure of peace, even as war raged beyond the horizon. The queen moved through the ruins with fire in her chest and ice in her veins. Her armies had scoured the battlefield, but whispers of betrayal reached her ears. Her daughters had vanished amid the chaos. To her, they were not merely heirs, but the embodiment of her rule, the only fragments of innocence she had allowed to survive the centuries of war. Their absence was more than a wound, it was an open threat. If enemies discovered their lineage, the empire itself would fracture. She swore that whoever held them would pay in blood, whether human or her own. Her guard followed, blades sharp and words cautious, but none dared to speak of what her eyes betrayed, fear, buried beneath wrath. She scoured wreckage and shadows until she found a sight that stilled even her breath. There, among twisted steel and smoldering stone, sat the human. His body slumped in exhaustion, weapon at his side, yet his posture betrayed vigilance. Against his chest, curled in sleep, lay her daughters, their small hands resting on him as though he were their guardian. Rage struck first. Her instincts screamed to unleash fury, to tear him apart for daring to touch what was hers. But the scene refused to bend to hatred. The children were not bound or broken. They were not afraid. They were safe, and more than that, they were content. In the arms of her sworn enemy, they had found the one thing she had failed to give them in the shadow of war: peace. Her guards readied their weapons, demanding vengeance. Yet she raised her hand, silencing them. Her mind raced. For years she had painted humans as parasites, destroyers, a creeping blight on the stars. She had called them fragile, reckless, unworthy of survival. And now, the proof of her words crumbled before her eyes. This soldier, battered and alone, had done what entire legions had not. He had protected her heirs not for power, not for ransom, but out of choice. The queen's thoughts churned. Was her war a shield for her people, or a prison of her pride? She had told herself that humanity's rise threatened her empire's existence, but perhaps the truth was sharper. Humanity's endurance mocked her failure. Where her kind had grown complacent, humans adapted. Where her kind clung to the past, humans carved futures from nothing. And now, where she had offered her daughters only a legacy of violence, a human had given them gentleness. The weight of the crown pressed heavier. She could end the soldier's life in an instant. It would satisfy her rage, silence her doubts, and remind all who followed that she remained unchallenged. Yet a single glance at the peaceful faces of her children unmade that choice. To kill him would not erase what he had shown her. It would not change the truth that her daughters had chosen, in their innocence, to trust a human over all else. Silence stretched long, heavy with the clash of duty and revelation. Her guards shifted, uncertain, watching their queen wrestle with the moment that could define an empire. She looked once more at the soldier, his breathing ragged, his arms still locked protectively around those who should have been his enemies. And in that stillness, she felt the first crack split through the crown she had worn for centuries. Her guards' voices pressed against her silence, demanding the human's death. They called him unworthy, a thief of her bloodline, a danger to the empire. Yet their words were ash in her ears, for her gaze lingered not on the soldier's frailty, but on the way her daughters clung to him, as though he were the only anchor in a storm that had consumed their world. For all her power, she had never inspired such trust. Pride told her to strike him down. Instinct told her to reclaim her heirs. But something older, quieter, forced her to pause, the truth that war had blinded her to. The soldier stirred, meeting her gaze without flinching. His weapon lay untouched, his body failing, yet his arms did not loosen around the children. With a voice cracked by exhaustion, he spoke no pleas, only defiance. He would not surrender them, not even to their mother. The audacity shocked her guard, but to the queen it carried a weight that pierced deeper than steel. In his stand, she saw humanity distilled, not invincible, not eternal, but unyielding. Her empire had been built on fear, yet fear had bred only decay. This soldier, nameless and alone, carried no crown, no fleet, no throne. Yet in that moment, he held more power than she. The power to embody hope, the power to protect without chains. Her daughters had chosen him not by blood or decree, but because his actions spoke of something her rule could not offer. The guards urged her again to strike, to remind the stars that their queen bowed to nothing. She raised her hand, and the battlefield stilled. But instead of unleashing wrath, she dismissed them. Murmurs spread, disbelief and anger mixing with unease, yet none dared disobey. She stood alone, staring at the soldier and the fragile future cradled in his arms. Her decision would not merely end or spare a life. It would decide whether her empire clung to ashes or sought renewal. She chose silence over death. She turned her armies back, the war she had ignited smothered not by defeat, but by a single act of mercy she could not deny. The soldier remained faceless, nameless, a shadow among billions, yet his defiance shattered the crown she had carried for centuries. She left him alive, not out of weakness, but because she knew that to kill him would mean killing the last proof that her people still had something to learn. When she walked away, the burden of her crown felt heavier than ever, for she understood now that its glory had long since broken. Her daughters stirred, their breath soft against the human's chest, and though they did not see her decision, she knew they would one day inherit its weight. Not through conquest, but through the truth they had revealed. Survival was not born of domination, but of compassion. Thus ended her war, not in the blaze of fleets, but in the quiet choice of a single soldier who refused to abandon innocence. Humanity had prevailed not through strength of arms, but through the strength to protect even those who called them enemy. And in that choice, the galaxy itself shifted, for a queen's crown had shattered, and a new legacy began.